Premium Media's Mining Weekly is interviewing Paul Miller, the founder and director of AmaranthCX, who has produced a mining map to fill the huge mineral property information gap in South Africa. Paul, tell us about the information one can glean from your online South African mining map.
Well, Martin, its origin story is quite a long one. You know, I was involved as an investment banker in mining in South Africa. I was involved in as a coal miner looking to acquire coal properties. And I've been deeply immersed in South African mining regulation for a long time. And it's always been apparent to me that we don't nearly have enough publicly available information. I mean, we live in a constitutional state that requires transparency from our government, but we get the exact opposite. And it's been very hard to determine who has what, where, for what commodity, and for how long. And over time, being in the industry and as I gained experience and having a little bit of an interest in technology, we started gathering up a database of properties, of mines, of historic mines. And as that grew, it was something that only myself or my team had access to. We used tools like Google Earth, where we could put pins in maps and, you know, say this is that mine or where the boundaries are. And we built that up over time, but nobody else could really benefit from that. And I'm sure there are hundreds of other people out there who've all tried to do the same, you know, try desperately to find information as best they could. Eventually, I found myself consulting to mining companies on their sales processes of mining supply companies who sell to mining companies. When I found myself consulting to them, and in the early days of lockdown, when I couldn't go out and see people, I thought, well, maybe this is the time to determine, using a map in an organized fashion, what the addressable market is for someone selling safety boots or nuts and bolts to mines, what that actually is and where these mines are. Because, of course, mines don't have street addresses generally. They need to be geolocated. Once you've geolocated them, you've got a map. During lockdown, I was talking to people on various social media, people coming back to me saying, well, can't we get your map? Can we have it? So I've worked quite hard on this, so perhaps we can turn it into a commercial product. And ultimately, this is what our mining map is. Not only is it a map of every possible, as far as we can at least ascertain, possible mining property boundary, but it's also the shafts, the pits, and some further detail as well.
So just looking at this map, there seems that we've had such an opportunity loss in South Africa, and it links to the absence of a mining cadastre. What sort of opportunity loss have we suffered?
It's dramatic, Martin. I mean, no self-respecting mining jurisdiction that is serious about attracting mining capital doesn't make information available to potential investors. And that's what we've done for 20 years. We've kept it secret. The officials have used it as a source of power. The secrecy has been used to cover up incompetence and corruption. And it's taken 2 decades of effort to get people to realize that transparency is necessary. And the biggest problem, of course, was there was no support for transparency until fairly recently from the incumbent mining industry. So the incumbent mining industry, the members of the Minerals Council South Africa, kept their own information close to their chests and didn't campaign for open information until about 3 years ago. So that's part of the weakness, right? Is that if you have 2 negotiating parties and neither are asking for transparency, then you're not going to get it. It's tremendously important. It's really, really important to know who has what rights where, and importantly for what and when they expire, so that new investors can come along and in a fair and open process apply for those properties. It's vitally important. You can only think there's some malice or malevolent intent behind the fact that this information has been denied to the industry and to the public at large.
And those wanting to apply for prospecting and mining rights, how far can your SA mining map take investors towards successfully finding some prospect opportunities and then submitting for rights, etc.?
Well, let's have a look at the map, Martin. So what we've done is we've used every potential source of information to establish from public records, other than the DMRE itself, who won't provide information, other than through a Promotion of Access to Information Act process, right? So you have to fill out a form, be very specific what you're asking for, and pay a fee and then you're lucky if you get the information in 6 months, if at all. Here, what we've done is we've used listed company information. We've used deep Googling to find environmental impact assessment documents and the commendably transparent South African Heritage Resource Agency database. And that, funnily enough, is where the reports that are required to investigate paleontological and archaeological heritage of a site are disclosed. So we have to go and find where mining companies have done specialist studies as part of their EIA for fossils and for historical relics. And we have to get those reports and back solve from that where these mining rights are. I mean, it's bizarre that that's how we have to find this information. But we have been able to establish the boundaries of hundreds of mining rights and prospecting rights across the country. And we've partnered with OneMap, who are a South African technology company out of the Western Cape, and they provide the back end. They allow us to maintain the data, and then we can display it, as you can see here, for subscribers to see. And of course, we've got costs. We've got to pay for the servers and the technology and the time. So it is a subscription model, although we have made it available free of charge to journalists and to NGOs who are active in the sector. And what you can see here on the map, for example, is the western limb of the Bushveld complex, the eastern limb, the coal of the Highveld, the Wits gold. We can go west and we can start looking at what I call the limestone crescent from Lichtenburg through Mafeking. We can see a lot of the prospecting rights for kimberlite diamonds. We can see the Free State gold fields. So we've added a lot of information. We've also got alternative base layers where people can zoom in and have a look at farm names. They can look at aerial photographs. So, for example, if I change the base layer here, we can actually zoom in and we can find, you can look at a picture of the farms underlying a right, and then you can also look at the farm boundaries. You can establish what the farm names are. So, for example, there would be a farm, and if you wanted to know what that farm boundary name was, you could activate it and you could get the details on that farm. The name, you can see farms that we haven't found details of prospecting rights or mining rights. And it's all the sorts of basic functionality that you would expect in a competently regulated mining jurisdiction to be provided free through a portal by the state itself. We don't have that, so we've come up with the best solution we can. It has a lot of prospecting rights, a lot of mining rights. It's by no means, we don't guarantee that it's complete because we're dependent on obscure sources of data, but we think it's the best we can do under the circumstances. And it should aid anyone who wants to narrow down the chances of getting a competing right or applying for a property that's actually covered by someone else's mining right.
And you find that there are a lot of rights are just lying dormant. I thought it was a use it and lose it, but there seems to be dormant opportunities.
It's certainly not use it or lose it, Martin. And the reason appears to be that if you've got a prospecting right and it's coming up for expiry after 5 years, and if you put in your renewal application and you do nothing further to move the renewable application through the process, it just sits at the department. And the way the regulations are specified is that if you have a prospecting right and you have applied for a renewal, you can continue to prospect. When you eventually get your renewal, it might be for a limited 3-year period. There are prospecting rights held by prominent members of the Minerals Council for an excess of 18 years when the legal maximum is 8. And of course, without any public information being made available, nobody can check up on these things. So the oldest trick in the book, you have a prospecting right, you have to renew it, you submit your renewal application, and you know full well that you'll get no attention from the department because they've got such a major backlog that unless you push for its renewal, it won't happen. And then you can continue prospecting on the never, never. So no, I mean, the idea that we have a use it or lose it system is ludicrous under the complete administrative dysfunction of the department. It's funny.
And our whole economy has been really built on mining. And what I see here is that development in mining has absolutely been stifled, even though there are possibilities, they're not being followed.
I mean, one of the reasons we've made this available for journalists like yourself, Martin, is in the hope that you will actually have a look at the map and see things and be reminded. For example, right here in the middle, we have the mega mine gold prospecting right that was being hyped about 10 years ago by Goliath Mining, or Goliath Resources. It was a listed company, and there was talk of, I think, 7 million ounces of gold that could potentially be mined here. This is between Nigel and Heidelberg. It would have put thousands of underground mine workers to work had it been developed, but there's no further information. We don't know if that prospecting right's expired. We don't know that a mining right might have been applied for. We don't know whether other potential buyers have come along, and it's because it's owned by an unlisted company that has no obligation to make ongoing disclosure. So the mega mine project of the Wits gold, what's come of it? I don't know. It existed once. If we go across to the west coast of South Africa, where there are obviously lots of mineral sands deposits, we've got this major mineral sands project called the Elephant Project area, inland from where Tormin mines mineral sands. We don't know what's come of that, whether mining rights been applied for, whether a mine might be built. But worse, Martin, there are long-standing mining rights. Now, in the Act, as I read it as a non-lawyer, if you are awarded a mining right, you are required to start mining activities within 12 months of being awarded that mining right. We've got mining rights that have been awarded 7, 8, 9 years ago, but there's no apparent mining happening. Now, that's also a major contradiction of the use it or lose it requirement. For example, between Platinum Group Metals' Waterberg project and the northern end of Mogalakwena are 2 mining rights to mine platinum. I think that they were awarded in excess of 7 years ago. There doesn't appear to be any actual mining happening there. So if the DMRE is the custodian of South Africa's mineral rights and is meant to govern them so that they are optimally exploited to the benefit of all South Africans, why are people being awarded mining rights and they're not mining? We see it again in the Mariko area, where there's a major, very significant fluorspar deposit over which a mining right has been granted, but there's no mining happening. So one of the fundamental requirements of the MPRDA was that we have use it or lose it. You either meant to exploit the mining right or the minerals underlying the mining right, or you should lose that mining right so that the next potential mining company could try. And we're certainly not seeing that. And because there isn't the likes of this map, or there hasn't been the likes of this map available to the industry, nobody can interrogate these questions.
And also now, with so much investment going into renewables, would there be any upsets for people wanting to go into renewables through a lack of transparency here? And how is your map helping them?
Oh, absolutely, Martin. There's a Section 53 of the MPRDA requires that if anyone wants to do anything on any agricultural property other than agriculture, you have to first get the Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy's permission. There's a logic to that. They don't want people building developments and sterilizing mineral rights. But what that means is that you have to make an application to the minister to get permission to build a renewables project, say, near a major main transmission substation in Mpumalanga. But in order to make that application, you first have to go to some effort to discover what prospecting and mining rights exist. Now, there's no way to do that except to ask the DMRE itself. But the DMRE itself is taking upwards of 6 months to simply do the geospatial investigation to determine from their own records whether there's a prospecting right or a mining right in application or in existence on that property. Now, in any other country, you could go to an online portal and immediately establish that. Here, you've got to go and make application to the DMRE, who themselves aren't able to easily establish what prospecting rights and mining rights exist. So we are adding a massive bureaucratic bottleneck, not just to mining projects, but to any projects because of Section 53 of the MPRDA.
And will they publish it when they come out with this cadastre now? Will we be having all of this hopefully at some stage? The cadastre just seems to be taking so long.
Well, I think, Martin, we have to accept that part of the reason the cadastre is taking so long is that there's active opposition to implementing a cadastre. This is not a genuine honest effort to bring transparency to the mining industry, because they could have published a geodatabase file of all this information at any stage in the last 10, 15 years. There was nothing stopping them publishing the data. What they want is a cadastre that handles all the detail for applying for prospecting and mining rights. So let's understand what a cadastre is. A cadastre is a geospatial front end with a workflow back end, so that you can look to see what's available, but that you can handle the applications through the system, the payments, the transactions through the system. Now, the fact is that the geospatial data has been available for decades, and that the department has simply refused to publish it. That could have been done separate from building the workflow system for handling the applications. So I suspect, yes, obviously the cadastre should solve this problem, but it could have been solved in many other ways. This portion of the problem could have been solved in many other ways over the years, and the only assumption you can reach now is the reason it hasn't been published is deliberate.
That was Creamer Media's Mining Weekly interviewing Paul Miller on his comprehensive online South African mining map.